right, so we finished yesterday with this discussion of the Declaratory Act, and the colonists sort of feel like they have won a bit of a victory, but remember that the British want to make gosh darn sure that the colonists know that the British retain absolute authority to tax them. Can you remind me, the colonists felt that one of the reasons the British shouldn't be able to tax them like this was because they didn't have representation, but the British, they disagreed, and they said the colonists did have representation. What kind? Virtual representation, right? Parliament represents English citizens, and you're an English citizen, okay, but they weren't buying that. But in any case, the British are still really, really poor, right? They have a lot of debt. They've got to figure out a way to pay it off. And so, as political leadership in England changes, the townshend duties will be passed the following year. And so the townshend duties are going to be a tax raised on all kinds of goods. It includes paper, but also lead, tea, paint, certain kinds of ink. Anyway, anything you can think of, really. All of these very commonly used goods. And so the townshend duties are going to inspire a lot of frustration. We're going to see renewed calls for boycotts. The Sons of Liberty are going to keep doing their thing. And basically, if I had to sum up the impact of the townshend duties in 2 seconds or less, I would say it just made the colonists even madder. Right? But if we want to talk about being mad, we should talk about the Boston Massacre. Remember that one of the things the colonists just felt didn't make any sense about the British complaints was that if the British had so much debt, why is there a blank in the colonies? A standing army. Why is there a standing army in the colonies? Because we know standing armies are expensive. Now, you and I both know that the British are a little bit worried that if they remove their standing army, that the colonies will, refuse to abide by British regulations. Plus, there's the whole Pontiac Rebellion thing. But anyway, the standing army is there, and they are not anybody's best friend. First of all, can you just imagine a whole bunch of, grouchy, conscripted 18 to 25-year-old young men a long way away from home, stuck in army barracks for endless days with nothing to do with their life. Can you imagine?
There's no goal for them, really.
Not a lot of goal. They don't really like where they are. The colonists don't like them. They're not making a lot of friends. We have some visitors from the university. How do a whole bunch of young men at the university get on for long stretches of time? Look, she's a girl. She's shaking her head. She's like, no, that's that plan. Our gentleman friend is maybe less amused by this joke. But in any case, it's not going particularly well. I have a 5-year-old, and I can sort of imagine what he's going to be like when he's 18. So one never knows. But it's just really not going very well. The redcoats are sort of prone to get into, scrapes here and there. The colonists are accusing them of destroying private property and all this business. Anyway, it's not going to get any better in 1770. So one night, a whole bunch of colonists, roused by the Sons of Liberty, they're kind of, grumbling or whatever. They've had a whole lot to drink. And there are some redcoats that are stationed on patrol, as always, which, if there were soldiers on our street corners, we might feel a little bit irritated, why is the government sending soldiers, The government didn't actually send any soldiers, and last summer, there was a whole bunch of Texans who were thinking that the government was trying to get us or something, right? So there was a lot of frustration sort of running high, and in any case, probably what happened is that some colonists began to throw snowballs at these redcoats, and probably the snowballs were filled with rocks. So they're throwing rocks at these redcoats, and the redcoats are supposed to stand there, but come on, right? These are 18 to 25-year-old young men. They're a long way from home. They're really irritated at this point, and so at some point, somebody shoots. Now, the British would maintain that it was a colonist who discharged a weapon, spooked the soldiers, and it caused what was about the following event. But the colonists say it was the redcoats who shot first. Frankly, it doesn't really matter. Here's one of the important lessons of history. What actually happens is almost irrelevant, because what matters more than what actually happened is what people think happened, right? So what ends up happening, the redcoats do open fire at some point, whether it was first or in response to somebody shooting at them. They open fire, and 5 colonists are killed, including one mulatto colonist, who has gone down in history as the first African American to die for his country. Although this wasn't exactly war, it was kind of a complicated legacy. But anyway, Crispus Attucks, if you ever want to know his name. And in the aftermath, our friend Paul Revere creates this engraving. So this is going to be, put on a plate that can then be stamped, so that this image can be put into newspapers across the colonies. I want you to tell me what you notice in this painting, or in this engraving. It's an act. Okay, so the birds are smiling, right? They look pretty smug. What's this guy doing? Shoot, right? They're leading. He's been, they're being led. They're being told fire. They're in battle formation, right? All lined up. The colonists, how do they look? Yeah, they're disheveled. They're like innocent. They're just bystanders, just kind of hanging out there. Surely they have no possible nefarious explanation for why they would be in mass next to a whole bunch of soldiers. But anyway, sort of ignore that. Here they are, dead and dying. Isn't that sad? There's even a dog. Don't you feel sorry for the dog? Which is caught in the middle.
There's like excess smoke, so that kind of implies they've already fired before.
Sure, lots of smoke, but there's been a lot of firing going on. In any case, this becomes known as the Boston Massacre. Now, I think every human life is precious, but 5 people being killed, a massacre? I mean, maybe. But the calling it the Boston Massacre certainly makes it sound worse than perhaps it really is, right? And this engraving makes it look a whole lot worse than it actually really would be. Now, Britain realizes that this is a really big problem, right? Britain understands that nobody is going to be made a friend of the British government when things like this happen. So Britain tries to respond appropriately. They put all 5, I think it was 5, it was 6, I can't remember that now. Anyway, they put all of the redcoats involved on trial in the colonies. Anybody know who comes to their defense? John Adams, right? So no colonial lawyers want to defend them, but John Adams on principle says, no, everyone deserves a strong defense. He does a pretty good job, actually, because in fact, all but one of them essentially get off on the charges. They are acquitted of most charges or held to lesser charges. One guy is ultimately charged, but his punishment is basically just to be shipped back to England. And so Britain thinks that the whole thing has sort of been like resolved. And it sort of has been, but this imagery is powerful. Because when things get worse again a few years later, the colonists can point back and go, the British, they always were targeting us. They always were after us. And this is going to be problematic as it goes on. Then there's the Tea Act. Here's a funny thing about the Tea Act. The Tea Act was actually a law that lowered the tax on tea. It lowered, remember the township duties? They had taxes on tea. Well, the Tea Act, it restructured the tax on tea. It changed the way that tea was taxed, but it effectively lowered the tax on tea. People were going to pay less for the tea. That was the point, in fact, because the British East India Tea Company was having a whole bunch of trouble, like trying to compete with the Dutch East India Tea Company, and the British wanted the British East India Tea Company to survive, so they wanted more colonists to buy British tea. The boycott was being problematic, so they wanted to lower the cost of tea so that more colonists would buy. That's like literally the point. But the colonists, they smell a rat. They spy. They think something's fishy going on, right? Because what the British are really doing, obviously, is tricking them. They're like lowering the tax to like lull us into a false sense of security to get us to like agree that they have the right to tax us, and we're not going to have any of that. And so the Sons of Liberty really poorly disguise themselves as Native Americans. This is very generous. They almost look maybe like Native Americans here. They just took off their shirts and like continued to wear their like regular British-looking breeches or whatever. They like put some soot or ash or sometimes I can't think of the word. Anyway, they sort of like darkened their faces. They left their like hair in the ponytails and all this business. They just sort of stuck a few feathers in their hair. Nobody thought they were actually Native Americans, but it's kind of symbolic, right? They're dressing up as Mohawk Native Americans, Mohawk Indians, and that was sort of this like statement, like we are Americans, like we identify with these sort of native free peoples, that we're not going to be, like tricked by Britain's whatever ways. And they dump on board these ships in Boston Harbor, and they dump a whole bunch of tea into the ocean, like destroying the hundreds of thousands of dollars of property, right? And then, of course, magically, nobody in the colonies knows who any people were. We didn't see anybody. Did you? I don't think they were Native Americans. I think it was a raid, The British can't find anybody to punish. And the British are a little bit irritated. I'm like super understated. They were really, really mad. And so they're going to respond to something called the Coercive Acts. But the Americans had another name for them. The Americans called them the Intolerable Acts, because we would not tolerate them. And frankly, they're a little bit extreme. So the coercive acts go like this. Number one, here's the, like the big booger. Number one, they're going to close Boston Harbor until the city of Boston can pay the entire value of the damages lost during the Boston Tea Party. Hold on a second. Why does that make 0 sense? How does the city of Boston make money? Through the harbor. So if we close Boston Harbor, how are they supposed to make enough money to pay off the tea even if they wanted to do that? Good answer. They can't, right? But there we go. So they're going to close Boston Harbor until they can pay off the tea. It dissolves the Massachusetts State Assembly. So like, haha, colony Massachusetts, you think you can govern yourself, or we're mad, you made us mad now you have no rights. You're not going to have any say in how you're going to be governed. This guy, General Gage, is going to move a contingent of troops into the actual city of Boston to sort of impose martial law. And then it makes a whole bunch of other changes too, like any Americans accused of crimes by the British will have to be tried back in England, which is problematic because Americans already developed this sense of like, that as British citizens they had a right to be tried by a jury of their peers. And the British are going to say, yeah, you're British peers. And the Americans are going to say, that's not fair because the British back in England don't understand us. And so they're not a real jury of our peers. And then, to make it even worse, any British officers or soldiers that were charged with crimes by the Americans will also be charged and tried back in England. Again, like making it essentially impossible that they would be convicted of whatever they're charged with. The colonists are really, really unhappy, and here's something that's really, really important. It's not just Boston or Massachusetts that looks at the intolerable acts and goes, wow, this is horrible, we have to do something. Because up until this point, the colonists in Georgia and in Virginia and South Carolina had kind of been looking at all of the shenanigans the Sons of Liberty were doing in Boston, going like, wow, guys, come on, you're just, making trouble, you're just stirring up something that we don't need to deal with, you're just, you guys are troublemakers. But when the British respond like this, the colonists in Georgia and South Carolina and in Virginia and so on and so forth, they're going to go, if the British would do that to Massachusetts, would they do it to us? Are they looking to get rid of our self-government? Are they looking to rule us with some iron fist? Are they looking to take away our rights as British citizens? And here we begin to see some strong unity. In the aftermath of the coercive acts, or the intolerable acts, we begin to see a lot of activity from groups known as committees of correspondence. These are individuals in all of the colonies who would write letters. They're called circular letters. They write a letter saying, here's what's happening today. Here's what the British did to us today. And then they would mail it out, and they would send it, and it would go to all these different communities to spread the word. Everybody needs to be aware, here's what the British are doing in Boston. Because if we don't spread the word, remember, we can't rebel. We're not going to be an independent country if we don't unite as a group of colonies. And the coercive acts, like no other situation, the Stamp Act is sort of a big, the Stamp Act Congress is a big start, but the coercive acts do way more than that in getting the colonies to really sympathize with one another, and they all feel equally as upset by this sort of like huge overreach of British authority. Oh look, I had all that stuff. Okay. Oh, there was a quartering of troops. It's actually a separate law, the Quartering Act, which says that now troops have to be housed in Americans' homes and you have to provide for their food and board and all that. But you guys already know. Okay. Then in 1774, have we had enough problems yet? In 1774, the British passed the Quebec Act. You remember that one of the things that came as a result of the French-Indian War is that now the British have to rule over all this extra territory. Well, the Quebec Act is going to do two horrific things in the eyes of the colonists. The first, which is pretty bad, is that it's going to create a royally appointed government for Quebec. You're going, what's so bad about that? Because there's no self-government involved, right? These formerly French colonists, who are now British colonists because of the end of the French-Indian War, are going to be governed by a royal governor and a group of chancellors who are appointed by the king. No self-government at all appointed. So we're getting nervous. Is this Britain's plan? Do they want to get rid of all of our governments? They want to have everything to just be under, their thumb? But here's the really horrible part, and I hope you know that I'm being facetious, but the colonists actually thought this was worse. The really horrible part of the Quebec Act was that it recognized and accepted Catholicism as a legitimate religion that could be practiced in the territory of Quebec. America happens to religious tolerance. Remember the Puritans and how they don't care about tolerance and moving on, they just want their own. He had this idea, remember that, why did King James II get overthrown? Because he was supposed to be too Catholic, right? The English are very not Catholic. It's kind of like how they're not French. The British are thinking, we just don't want to fight with our French colonists. Can they just, accept our rule? And so they didn't want to, hammer home this, religious war in addition to having to get them to obey British authority. So the British are thinking this is like a conciliatory gesture. But the Americans are thinking that this is the British are abandoning, you know, the one true way of achieving God's grace, and they're going to like turn us all into papists, and we're going to give it some of the Pope, and it's going to be anyway, the end of the world. Bad stuff. So the court reacted, we talked about. So in 1774, the First Continental Congress is called. When you write those words down, please write, they are not interested in independence. This is only 2 years out from the Declaration being issued, but essentially no one says anything about independence in the First Continental Congress. One guy speaks up, and the rest of them all basically say, shut your mouth. Like, you're crazy. There's no way we could be independent. There's no way we could beat the British Army. What we need is reconciliation and the British to respect our rights. So nobody's talking about independence at the First Continental Congress. What they do say is that we need to defend ourselves. We need to show the British that we're serious about our rights. So we're going to appoint George Washington. You guys saw a little bit of that in the little video we watched. We're going to appoint George Washington. We're going to reaffirm our commitment to boycotts. We're going to show the British that we are serious. They can't do this to us. It doesn't go so well for them. Because just the following year then, the British began preparations. The British feel like the colonists are getting too rebellious. And so they make preparations to basically make a point. To prove to the colonists that they are not going to, that they have to, say they're sorry and come back into the fold. So the British get word that there is an armory in Concord, Massachusetts. And then the colonists had this sort of stockpile of weapons and ammunition. And they did. And it wasn't like they weren't stockpiling it like in preparation for revolution. It was a stockpile that had mostly been created for defense against Native Americans, right? So if the Native Americans raid, here's where we have all of our stuff. The British find out that it's there, or like figure out that it's there, and they decide that they're going to go and seize it. And you guys have heard the poem, right? You know, and one is by horse and two is by sea, and or land by. Anyway, Paul Revere, he runs and all this business. It's only half true, but it does happen that the Americans get word in just enough time, and these Minutemen. These are American colonists who have regular everyday lives. They are not interested in joining some formal army, but they have said that they'd be ready at a minute's notice to defend their liberty. So the Minutemen get just enough notice. They sort of muster at Lexington Green, and they're there. The British, have marched. They're getting there, and here's the American colonists waiting for them. And it goes really badly, right? Because the British are being fired upon by American colonists. The British fire back. Colonists' lives are lost. The British don't ever even make it all the way to the armory at Concord. They turn around because the British officer is kind of going, wait, this is not what we were told to do. We weren't told to engage in battle. We were just supposed to go and seize some supplies. So he wasn't interested in trying to fight off more colonists. He turns around and goes home, but the colonists aren't done. You've seen the movie The Patriot, you know how the rest of this works out, right? So the colonists who are angry about the losses that they faced at Lexington are going, the shortcuts home through the woods. The British have to march their big army, back down this road. The American colonists, they find the shortcuts, they go through the woods, they harass the British the whole way home. They kill a whole bunch of British soldiers, wound a whole bunch more, just in this process. And now blood has been shed. It's going to be very difficult to go back, right? The British have killed American colonists, in an active, direct, confrontation. The colonists have responded in kind. It's going to be very difficult to turn back. But even at this point, very few colonists are talking about independence. A few more than before, but we don't see anywhere near a majority interest in seeking independence, even as late as 1775. Even after they're shooting at each other, still, most people, including lots of the famous guys, right? Ben Franklin is foremost among them. Most people still want to reconcile with Great Britain. They just want the British to know that they are true and equal British citizens who have the rights of everyone in England, and they can't be treated this way. But then, our friend Thomas Paine writes a pamphlet called Common Sense. And in Common Sense, he advances, I hate to be sort of repetitive here, a common sense argument. Many Americans said, we're angry at the British, but we can't just leave. The British have protected us, and they're the reason we exist. They've supported our development. We have to maintain these ties for our economy. We just need them. And Paine writes this metaphor about children growing up. And says, you're right, we did need the British. You're right, they did support us. You're right, they did do a lot of things, and they were really useful, and all of that's great. And we still even like a lot of British stuff. We are culturally similar, we have lots of similar ideas, and all that's cool. But at some point, kids grow up. And it is only natural for when children reach the age of maturity that they must be independent. That parents can't order around their 40-year-old children. Those people are no longer children. They're grown. They have a right to make their own decisions and be treated as equals. They can't your when you're 40, your parents aren't going to be ordering you around, right? Like you're going to be able to make your own life choices. And Payne says, so it just makes sense. It's time. And it's really in this moment. It sells out through multiple printings. It's one of the most widely read documents in the colonies at this time. And it's really here where we begin to see the tone of the conversation shift. And we begin to see significant numbers of Americans talking about independence as an actual thing that they might be interested in. So then, in the summer of 1776, the Second Continental Congress will meet. And here, someone finally proposes, I think we should declare independence. And by a fairly strong margin, not overwhelming, but by a fairly strong margin, the Second Continental Congress, they vote in favor of independence. They assign this young guy, Thomas Jefferson, from Virginia, who was known as being a pretty good writer. They say, okay, you go and write it. Just write it up and we'll edit it when we come back. So he goes home, he frantically writes this document. He brings it back on July the 2nd of 1776. And for 2 days, the Continental Congress, they revise and edit his essay in front of him. Can you just, okay, so I want you to know, how you feel when you see your teacher, it's going to be me soon, I'll hand you back your essays tomorrow. You know how you when your teacher has marked things off or said this doesn't make any sense, right? And you know how you're I like that sentence, I don't want to cut that one, whatever, you know how you feel angry? Just imagine Jefferson. You're in front of all of these really fancy pants people, who are leaders in the colonies, and they're telling him well, I don't think this sentence is quite right. Well, I think we should do it. This is a little bit too superfluous or whatever. He gets real angry by all accounts. But anyway, what actually happens on July the 4th, ooh, Independence Day, is that the Continental Congress, they vote to approve the final draft of the Declaration. He has to then go home and write it up again, right? Write a clean copy. You have to do your final draft. So they don't actually sign the Declaration of Independence on July 4th. They just approve it, yes, this is going to be the final draft. They don't sign it until about a month later in August. This special painting, which hangs in the U.S. Capitol building, doesn't happen on July the 4th, but it's a good story. In any case, so they'll finally declare independence. This is one of the pieces that was cut out of Jefferson's original draft. It's about slavery. The Declaration itself is a long list of grievances. What's another word for grievances? Complaints, right? Things we're mad about, right? So it's saying, he has he has done this, and who's the he? King George, right? So this is all about the things we're mad about the king having done. And one of the things that Jefferson was going to blame on the king was slavery. That got cut really fast because Georgia and South Carolina, the delegates from those two colonies, said we're absolutely not going to include this. Slavery is not a problem. This is important for our colonial economy. We're not going to blame the king for slavery. So it was cut. But it's interesting because Jefferson himself owned slaves, right? One of my favorite quotes from Jefferson, I think helps us to understand at least how some of the founding fathers who owned slaves felt. When he says that owning slaves is like having a wolf by the ears. Can you imagine holding a wolf by the ears? Does that sound a good plan to you? Yes. No. It is not something good plan. It sounds terrifying, right? This is really a bad idea. You should not have done it. It is not good. But if you've got a wolf by the ears, should you let him go?
No.
I mean, that is also a really bad plan, right? Because the wolf that you have got by the ears is probably going to turn around and eat you up, right? So the slavery is like having a wolf by the ears. You're not happy that you got him, but you can't let him go. This is sort of how Jefferson feels about slavery. He understands and feels like there are moral problems with slavery, but then doesn't see any alternative for the colony. If they get rid of slavery, how can they survive? Is sort of his perspective, and we'll talk more about that a little later. Anyway, so what were the colonists thinking? I mean, the British had the world's strongest army and the strongest navy. They had defeated every other imperial power, including the French and the Spanish. They had been successful across multiple continents, and the American colonists had epically failed in the French and Indian War. They were not super successful in their military experience. So what were we thinking? To be honest, I'm not sure. I mean, we have the benefit of hindsight, right? We can now talk about all the advantages the colonists had. For example, can we name some advantages? They knew the territory. What? So we knew the territory. We're in home field, so we're fighting for defending our own territory. You always fight harder if you're fighting for your own home as opposed to in somebody else's territory. We have not a larger population total, but we have a significant, in terms of the British having to ship people over here. We have a sort of friendly, people around us. We fight differently. We identify our own ways to fight. We use this sort of Native American style guerrilla tactics as opposed to like trying to meet the British on the field of battle where we're not successful.
Since like we're going to be trying to increase our motivation is greater.
They have really strong motivation, right? Like, they're gonna all be killed if they don't win. So that's absolutely true.
I think most are kind of right because, of course, it's the British military versus the colonists, but all the colonists are in this, like more or less.
Not quite. We know that about a quarter of the colonists remained loyal to the British government. So there's at least a quarter who we would say loyalists. And there's probably another quarter or so who just want to stay out of it. They're not willing to choose a side. But about half or just over half of the colonists are significantly in favor. I would also argue that the colonists had really strong leadership, right? So George Washington, who we choose as our commander-in-chief, he's not the world's greatest military genius, but he is amazing at managing to get the colonial misfits to follow him, to accept military discipline, to trust him even when they're losing. That's a really big deal. And the British have some leadership challenges, especially as the war goes on. So there are all kinds of issues. But it's not looking good. The first couple of years of the war go really badly for the Americans. We lose New York City very quickly. The colonists are forced to retreat across the river, and they sort of have to leave Manhattan behind. The American colonists are going to sort of be cowed by the British as the British march more and more troops in. We're going to see thousands of Americans sign oaths of allegiance to Britain, saying they're not going to support the rebellion, which sort of reduces the pool for support that the colonists might have. But Washington manages to sort of what's the line from Hamilton musical? Snatch a stalemate from the jaws of defeat. That refers to another battle that comes later. But Washington manages to go, you know what, we're about to lose, but we're going to find a way to show that we're still in this. And so this sort of iconic image here, which of course never would have happened. It's very symbolic. There's all the people are dressed in the styles of different colonists from across the country, but of course they would have all been colonists from the same locations since they were all fighting together. Washington would never have been dumb enough to stand up in a boat that was going across the river. The flag didn't look like this, but there's all kinds of inaccuracies. But here's the story of what happened. So they've been forced out of New York City. It's Christmas Eve, and there's a contingent of Hessian soldiers. Hessian is spelled Hessian. Hessians are German mercenaries. They're not even British, but the British have hired these soldiers to come and support the British effort. These mercenaries are camped out in New Jersey, and they've been, drinking all evening. It's Christmas, right? And Washington says, you know what, we're going to score a victory. We're going to show them that we're not going to give up yet. And so he gathers in the American troops, and they very quietly go across the Delaware River, and they sort of sneak up on this camp, and they score a victory. Now, after their victory, after they defeat the Hessians, who were half dressed anyway, after they defeat them, what do they have to do? They retreat, right? They go back to where they were before. They don't actually gain any territory. This victory is entirely symbolic. But it does show that the colonists haven't given up. And this idea that they scored a victory, that they can actually defeat British soldiers, or at least German Hessian soldiers, is helpful at maintaining some morale, right? Because the American colonists, they sign up, right? They say they're enlisting in the American, the Continental Army. But who's going to stop them if they leave, right? They could just go to the British and be like, I'm loyal to you, or whatever. So we need inspiration to keep the Continental Army together. Anyway, so he's going to manage to do that, patriotism and all that business. So then what happens? Well, the war is going to go on for a while. You will notice this is not a military history class. There are a lot of battles we are skipping here. The war goes on for a while. But then when the Americans sort of organize at Saratoga, this is in the state of New York, the Americans find a way to sort of exploit the British weakness here. So the British are sort of underestimating their colonial rivals, and the British are underprepared for the battle at Saratoga. And Washington, who has been, you guys know about the winter at Valley Forge and about Marquis de Lafayette, who comes and he brings all of the, we can start singing so we know about the French aid, which will begin to arrive. We know about Baron von Steuben, right, who there's this Polish guy who helps drill in some military sense into the British or the American colonists. We know all that's happening. The colonists have been trained, and Washington says, you know what, we're ready. We're ready, we can do this. And so at Saratoga, almost miraculously, but it has a lot to do with how the British didn't expect enough out of the Americans. They sort of were ill prepared. When the Americans scored a victory at Saratoga, and here's why this is important. Because the Marquis de Lafayette had arrived before Saratoga, like he had come privately with help. So by the way, Lafayette was 19 when he came to the colonies, 19. So a 19-year-old kid leaves France, like, I'm going to go help those revolutionaries. He brings some of his own personal wealth to support. He's this kid, right, who comes over. But anyway, he's been helping us already. But after the Americans managed to win at Saratoga, the French spy an opportunity. Now, let's not kid ourselves. The French don't care about the Americans, right? They could care less about these uprights, or couldn't care less about these uprights, and pushing the backcountry and whatever. But you know what they do care about? Beating the British. That's right. And here looks like an opportunity to give the British a good punch in the nose after that sort of humiliating defeat at the end of the French Indian War. So the French go, you know what? I think maybe these colonists might actually do it. Let's help them so that we can secure a defeat of the British. And if it happens to work, then not only will we be able to insult the British by helping the Americans, declare independence, but we'll also get a seat at the treaty negotiations where we might be able to win back some territory. Right? So the French have their own reasons for getting involved, but it's important that it happens at Saratoga. Saratoga is the turning point in this war. Without the French, the colonists could not have won. Could not. They didn't have enough supplies. They printed Continentals, and there's this phrase, it's not worth a Continental. So those Continentals were basically worthless pieces of paper that had essentially no value. Inflation is rampant, supplies are running low, all kinds of bad things going on. The colonists, they had done a good job up to this point, but they could never have defeated the British without the help of the French. Any question?
No.
Okay, so they do this. But then shortly after, the Americans lose Philadelphia, which is sort of humiliating. And so then Washington's army, tries again. They get all organized. But the French come in, and the war changes. And the sort of final battle then is going to come late in 1780. And it's going to come after the British sort of shift their strategy. They've been focusing in the north, right, in New York and in Massachusetts and Pennsylvania. But they decide that they're going to shift their big push to the south. Any ideas why? There are many more loyalists in the South, right? Now remember, the South did feel some sympathy for the colonists after the coercive acts and all that, and there are patriots in the South. But more in the South are going to identify closely with the British because of things like the aristocratic system, right? Like the plantation system with sort of the elite planters on top. That has a lot to do. There's a lot of similarities with the British in that sense. The Southerners rely more on the British, right? There's no craftsmen or very few craftsmen in the South, so they're going to almost all of the goods that they use are going to have been imported from the British, right? They rely on the British as a source to sell their crops to, right? Tobacco and cotton and so on. So more loyalists are in the South. Fewer, and by sort of the same reasons, fewer patriots in the South. So the British think, look, we'll get a stronghold in the South, and we'll use that as a way to then slowly push out the patriots. They shift the South, and as they're moving that direction, Washington, together with Lafayette and the French, come with a plan. And their plan is going to be to corner the British, the bulk of the British forces, at Yorktown. Okay, so this is in Virginia. And the Continental Army is booking it to get there. They're going as fast as they can. They are marching double time, and they sort of finally make it there because if Cornwallis can manage to get out of the sort of peninsula he's holed up on, he's on a peninsula because it's easy to be supplied, right? If you're there next to the coast, you can get supplies from the ships very easily. It's easily defended, right? You can kind of see if anybody's coming. So he had chosen the spot strategically. Because he didn't think the colonists would be able to get there to corner him. But the colonists, they make it there. Meanwhile, the French are coming in using their navy. The colonists had no navy to speak of. The French come in with their navy, right, and they block in Lord Cornwallis and prevent British reinforcements from arriving via Chesapeake Bay. And as a result, then, the American colonists, together with their French allies, are able to force Lord Cornwallis into a surrender. And so the Battle of Yorktown is the final battle of the American Revolution, the final significant battle. There are skirmishes that go on because this is the 1780s where the internet doesn't exist and word only travels as fast as horses can carry them, so people don't even know the war is over, right? So there's still some skirmishes. But anyway, so Lord Cornwallis surrenders. He refuses to go personally to sign the terms of surrender with George Washington. He sends a lower aide, which is sort of an affront to American whatever, pride, but we survive. And then the Americans will send negotiators to try to end the war. What happens to the Loyalists? Well, they are really in a pretty tight place because the British never really trusted the Loyalists. The British always felt like even the Loyalists weren't really loyal, you know? So the British never really gave them any particular advantages. The colonists, of course, the Patriots, hated them. And so after the war, there's like this big movement to try and like take property of loyalists. They're, you know, paraded through the streets, some of them are tarred and feathered, some of them are killed. Gets pretty rough. About 100,000 of them, loyalists then, have seen no choice but to leave. They just go back to England where they have problems because they're seen as like Americans and therefore sort of derided. Some of them go to other colonies. In the Caribbean, for example. But they had a pretty rough time of it. And you can see here in the map, right? So loyalist strongholds in and around New York, lots of elite merchants there who liked the British a lot. And then, of course, in the South, where we see lots of these trading towns where the planters would have taken up residence. Anyway, and they're going to kind of go away. Okay, so in 1783, we're going to send our best guys to try to go and negotiate the terms of the treaty. It's going to be Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay. But they have this sort of complicated decision to make. Should they wait for the French contingent to arrive? Should they wait for the French to get their like negotiators together to talk to the British? Or should they negotiate separately with the British? I mean, the French had basically allowed us to win the war. There's that. But there's also a bit of a fear. The French were clearly more powerful in this brand new American country. There was a fear that the French would negotiate us out of the bargain. That they would negotiate a treaty with the British that would like give the colonies back to England. That was a worry that we had. So it's a little bit of a jerk move, but we negotiate with the British behind the French back. We work on that negotiation. We signed the Treaty of Paris with the British before the French fully formed a delegation. And the terms go like this. Number 1, we are independent. Da, da, da. Number 2, we get all territory south of like what we would call Canada, so not Canada's going to remain British. We get all territory south of Canada, so south of the Great Lakes-ish, and east of the Mississippi River. A lot of territory. We get the right to fish off of Newfoundland. You're going down to the Dallas and ever heard of Rodriguez. Why did we negotiate about fishing off of Newfoundland? Because it was a really important part of New England commerce. Was they got a lot of fish off the coast of Newfoundland, and that was pretty close to British territory in this treaty. So we got guaranteed rights to fish off of Newfoundland. And finally, we promised that we would pay back all of the debt. Anything we owed to British merchants from before the war, like that scene. And anything that we owed to loyalists, or any property that had been destroyed by any loyalist property that had been destroyed, that we would pay it back. Do we honor that particular part of the term? We don't.
Nah.
We kind of try. It's not like we had horrible intentions exactly. It's just that, I mean, short of like instilling martial law and like having, you know, continental troops in every corner to like keep order, there's not a lot that can be done. Also, the new American, the United States doesn't have a lot of money just floating around to pay off all these debts. So this part sort of just like gets ignored. But anyway, the colonists win. And that's the end of the story. And we did it in 40 minutes or less.
We went over
Be
the
like, I
birth of
want
the
that money
country
back.
and